Hi, I'm Kay of cleversomeday.com. I've got some great news for those of you who want an easier but still very accurate way to align your engraving for the Cricut Maker. On other brands, and even on earlier Cricuts, a temporary jig has been the standard way to do precise alignment. The idea is to put scrap cardstock or vinyl on the mat, cut the shape of the blank out of it, then replace the cutout with the actual blank and engrave it, all while keeping the same frame of reference. Seems simple, but has been impossible on a Maker until recent changes to Design Space have given us some new flexibility. For a temporary jig to work, you have to precisely place shapes with respect to each other, even when they're on different mats. Design Space still doesn't support this directly, but there is a workaround I call the dummy shape method, which I've detailed in earlier videos. In fact, the initial project setup is identical to when you're using the dummy shape method. So to get started, I open a new Design Space project and make sure it is set to Maker. I place a circle from the Shapes button, resize it to 0.01 inches by 0.01 inches, and position it at x equals 0.25 and y equals 0.25. If you want to understand why we're doing this, I'll link up a prior video in this video's description. Next, I need to shape the exact size and shape as the blank I'll be engraving on, which in this case is the rounded rectangle acrylic tag from Cricut Maker. I brought it in from another project using the new copy and paste feature. Depending on where you buy your blanks, you may get a matching SVG or template from them, as I have, or if it's just a simple shape, you can create it yourself with the Shapes tool. This shape, which I'll call the target shape, stays on basic cut, which is the default operation. You'll want to set it to a light color so you can see. Because I want this to be a quick demo, I'm going to just use text for my engraving design. I'm going to click the text tool, type my word, and then change the font, size, and spacing to fit my blank. There's something special about this font, though, called CC Ledler Filled, which is a freebie from Cricut Maker. I designed it with tight striping, so that when you engrave with it, the letters will appear solid rather than just having an outline, as is usually the case. Using pre-filled fonts like CC Ledler is a simple way to improve your engraving results. I have tons of info in my Facebook group on how to choose fonts and graphics or adapt existing designs for engraving, so be sure to check that out. Once the text is done, I select it and the target shape and use the Align tool to center them. Since there's a hole in this blank, I'm going to select just the text and move it over a bit. The text design needs to be set to engrave under the Operation tab. You'll see that when I do that, it stays solid. That's indicative that the object has line fill of some kind. The next step applies only to clear acrylic. Because we want to engrave the back to be viewed from the front, we will mirror both the shape and the design together. So we select both and choose Flip Horizontal. You'll notice that not only does the text now appear wrong reading, but the hole in the blank has moved from the right to the left. With both layers selected, I'm going to type in x equals 2 and y equals 2 to move my design where I want it on the mat. Because we are using the dummy shape method, the position is going to carry over more or less from the canvas to the mat. The exact position doesn't matter, but you don't want it too close to the top, for reasons you'll see in a minute. I'm actually setting up two separate mats, which is how we will be able to change the order of operation and use two different material settings. Each mat needs its own dummy shape, so I'm going to duplicate the first one, set the new one to engrave, and position it at x equals 0.25, y equals 0.25, so it's exactly stacked with the first one. Very important that they are both in exactly the same spot on the canvas. So for the first mat, which will be for cutting, I need to select the target shape and the dummy shape that is set to basic cut. So both of the layers that are set to basic cut. Since we're working with tiny shapes that are stacked, we'll select on the layers panel by clicking the first item and then holding down the shift key to select the next one. You can see from the highlights on the layer panel and from the selection box on the canvas that I have grabbed what I need. So I'm going to click Attach. When I do that, the set is going to jump to the top and may change color. So just pick a light color again and hold on, because the next step should fix the stacking order. We're going to do the same thing to set up the second mat, which will be for engraving. Select the engraving design and the remaining dummy shape, which is also set to engraving, and attach. The engraving pops back up to the top, still showing in the right place on the blank, and you should be seeing two attached sets in the layers panel. This is a good time to save your project if you haven't already. You can reuse this file for the same blanks by just swapping out the engraving design instead of starting from scratch. Go ahead and click Make It. At the left of the Prepare screen, you'll see two small mats. The top one says Engrave, and the bottom one says Basic Cut. So when we click on the small mat that says Basic Cut and look at the large mat beside it, we see that the dummy shape has forced the target shape to the 2-2 grid mark, just like we planned. Going back to the Engrave mat, it's a little harder to tell that the engraving design is in the right place with respect to the target, but if we could switch back and forth really quickly, we could see that this process keeps the two mats in sync with each other. We'll go back to the Basic Cut mat because we want to cut first to make a temporary jig for the blank to sit in. I've already loaded my mat with a scrap of cardstock, but it's a good idea to double check that the cardstock is in the right place for the cut while the preview mat is still showing. This is also a good time to make sure your star wheels are placed on either side of the cut, which is where the blank will eventually be traveling. Press Continue, and after your maker connects, you'll be prompted to choose a material. Remember that on this mat we are cutting cardstock, so we choose the material based on whatever cardstock is on the mat. Mine is Recollections 110 pound, so I'm picking my custom setting for that from my favorites at the top. Press the blinking Load Mat button to load the mat. Then press the Go button. The Maker will do a mat check and a tool check, and then it will start on our design. The first thing it does is tap on the dummy shape. It's double cutting here because of the material we chose. When it finishes, we will carefully remove the cutout from the cardstock without removing the mat and without shifting the cardstock around it. If it doesn't come out cleanly and you need another pass, you can press the Go button again, but my setting worked perfectly. Moving back to the computer, you'll see the familiar 100% screen asking you to unload the mat. But we're going to rebel at this point and ignore the screen prompts and that flashing unload light on the Maker. Instead, you're going to push Dismiss at the top of the computer screen, then Cancel at the bottom right. Next, we choose the green Yes button from the orange stripe across the top. In months and years past, clicking the Yes button would be accompanied by the sound of the Maker ejecting the mat. But thankfully, it doesn't do that now. After all that mousing and clicking, we return to the Prepare screen with the mat still firmly gripped by the rollers. This may seem trivial, but seriously, I've been lobbying Cricut for 7 years for the privilege of not unloading my mat. You are looking at the best new feature of version 6.5, and it was never even announced. So thank you, Cricut. Our temporary jig is done, so on to the engraving portion of the process. Click the Engrave mat on the left, and then press Continue. Again, it will find our Maker and ask us to pick a material, but this time it's the material to be engraved that it's asking us for. Click Browse All Materials, and then either use the search box or scroll to the bottom and select 2mm acrylic. By the way, it's because we can use two separate mats without unloading that we could cut first, and that we can use two different settings. You can't do either of those things with one mat. Click Done, and the screen will skip forward to the prompt to press the Go button, because it knows we still have the mat loaded. You'll notice that it also skipped the prompt to load the engraving tool and shows it as if we have already done that. So I'm going to swap out the blade and install the engraving tool now. Remember, it's the one marked 41. Time to load the blank into our temporary jig. I've already put double-sided tape on the viewing side of my blank, and I am removing the protective layer from the other side. I'm going to peel the backing off the double-sided tape, flip the blank over, and line it up in the slot face down. If you recall from before, that means I'm loading it with the hole on the right for this project. Sorry my hands are in the way here, but hopefully you get the idea. I'm loading the blank square into the slot, seating it flush with the mat, and pressing down thoroughly to make sure it is secure. It's awkward with a camera in the way, but normally not difficult, especially for small blanks. For larger blanks, or if I didn't have the double-sided tape or a brand new mat, I would also use painter's tape for the leading and trailing edges for extra security. You can see that the rollers cover the first inch of the mat, so putting the mat 2 inches from the top leaves us room for tape, but still gives us some support underneath. You may want to use a clipboard or something solid below the mat while you're pressing down on a large blank. Everything checks out, my engraving tool is loaded, my blank is secure, and the star wheels are out of the way. So I take a deep breath and press go. Again, the Maker does a mat check and a tool check and then starts the engraving. Because we never unloaded the physical mat, and because we use dummy shapes to hold the same frame of reference between the cutting and engraving runs, the Cricut can go precisely within less than a ½ millimeter to the right spot to engrave. In contrast, when you do unload the mat, you introduce a margin of error of up to a couple of millimeters. 2 millimeters may sound minuscule, but it can make a big difference on small blanks or with unforgiving designs. I have lots of related info, like where to get these blanks, how to make your engraving look solid, where to get pre-filled fonts, how to engrave photos, how to make a permanent jig, and where to get shapes to match your blanks that I'll link up for you in the video description. Be sure to check that out. When the engraving is finished, I again resist the prompts to unload the mat. Instead, I take a good look at the results after removing the dust with tape or a soft brush. I'm satisfied with just one pass because I used a pre-filled font, but if you need another pass, all you need to do is press the go button again. Once I carefully remove the finished piece from the mat, I could load in another blank and press the go button to continue engraving multiples of this design. In fact, as long as I don't press the blinking unload button on the Maker, I can navigate back to the Design Space canvas and even swap out for a different design that is set up using the same steps. Bottom line, don't unload the mat until you're sure you're done engraving the same blanks for the day. Relish in this newfound freedom, because once you unload the mat, you have to cut a new temporary jig to get this kind of accuracy. Check out my sensor jig process if you want something you can make once and use over and over, even when the jig has been removed from the mat. I love these little tags because they're so versatile. You can use them for key rings, zipper pulls, or even as a gift tag. This temporary jig process works for any acrylic or metal blank under 2.4 millimeters thick, so you could also do LED base inserts or aluminum bracelets this way, to name a couple of examples. I hope you enjoyed learning this new and improved way to position your engraving with the Maker, and that you'll love having predictable and accurate placement every time. I also want to invite you to join my Cricut Engraving with Clever Someday Facebook group, where you can see lots of examples and get help. As always, I really appreciate you watching, liking, sharing, and commenting, and I especially hope you'll subscribe to my channel before you go. Thanks so much.